Hello, and welcome to the Captain's Table. I am your host, Dawn Deckman-Moeller, and our guest today is Daniel Lowenstein. Hello, Daniel.
Hi, how are you doing?
Doing very well, thank you. Daniel Lowenstein is an emeritus professor at UCLA Law School and an expert in election law. He was appointed by Governor Jerry Brown as the first chairman of the California Fair Political Practices Commission in 1974 and was Jerry Brown's chief deputy secretary of state. He was also a part of the universities graduating from Yale University in 1964 and magna cum laude from Harvard Law School in 1967. In addition to the election law scholarship, Lowenstein has also published commentary on literary works including Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice and Dickens' Bleak House. He has also served for many years as the chairman of the board of the Interact Theater Company and is currently on the board of the Odyssey Theater Ensemble, both in Los Angeles. We'd love to start talking about some of the things that you've done in your life, Daniel. So welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
You had mentioned to me that you had grown up on the East Coast. Tell me a little bit about where you grew up. And I know that there's a love for Broadway and theater and Shakespearean shows along with law. So let's start at the beginning.
Well, I did grow up in Manhattan. We lived on the Upper East Side, 90th Street, if you call that the Upper. And I went to public schools. I went to PS6, which is perhaps best known for anybody who's read The Catcher in the Rye as the school that Holden Caulfield went to. And then when he ran away from his prep school, went back there. And they opened up a new junior high school for me, which was called the Robert F. Wagner Senior Junior High School, a great name, I think. And the senior is in there to make sure that nobody confused him with Robert F. Wagner Jr., who was then the mayor of New York. The senior had been a very popular senator from New York during the Depression. And then I went to the Bronx High School of Science, and then I was lucky enough to go to Yale. So that was my education. And yes, I did start going to Broadway shows. My parents went to a lot of Broadway plays, and it was always, it's still to this day is exciting to me to think of, all the great plays that they saw the original production of. One of my loves is the old Broadway musicals, and it's just, really exciting to me to think that all the great plays of, say, Rodgers and Hart and Cole Porter and Jerome Kern and so on. I mean, they went to the original productions of most of those. So, I got introduced to theater well. And, so that was my upbringing in New York in a nutshell.
I love that. My mother actually worked with Fred Astaire. She was his driver in a film that was done in the early 80s. So I had an opportunity to meet him one time. So when I think about those great Broadway musicals, I think about such wonderful talents like Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, and the artists that your parents had seen. Did you ever have an inclination to be an actor? Or if you weren't going with your folks, were you involved with going to see theater at the beginning of attending college?
Well, yeah, in New York, I did, of course, go to plays with my parents, but I would say New York and Manhattan in particular is the best place in America, at least, and maybe in the world, to bring up children. And people always think I'm joking, but I don't, because one of the great things about living in Manhattan is that at an early age, you can start getting around on your own. You don't need your parents to take you places. Of course, there's so many wonderful things to do in New York. So I would go when I was in high school, probably maybe even junior high, during vacations. Matinees were on Wednesdays, and they would have standing room only for $2 in those days, and I could afford that. And I could just go down and see a play on my own. A little later, when I was still in high school, sometimes I had an older sister, and sometimes we would go to plays together. So, it was just a great place to be. And I really loved going to the theater. And no, I never thought of being an actor. I mean, that would be out of the question. For one thing, I can't remember lines. I'm a lawyer. I'm pretty good at speaking extemporaneously. I think I can speak in my own words, but I just can't remember lines. But more seriously than that, I suppose I probably could have overcome that. People have different personalities and things that they can do, and it's just not something I would be good at. I never thought about being an actor, but I just always enjoyed theater. And these days, especially, even in a place like Los Angeles, not that many people go to theater. And if you go to the small theaters, which I think are the best theaters, if you know which ones to go to in Los Angeles, a lot of the people you see there will be actors or people connected to the theater. But the theater is not supposed to be just for theater people. It's supposed to be for the world, for a general audience. And, I'm in that category.
Well, I love that story. I think you also had mentioned to me that you have also reviewed some plays, and I've done theater. I mean, I haven't done a ton of it, but the first thing we all do is we go look at the reviews. I mean, you just can't help it. It's human nature. And some actors refuse to read the reviews. But tell me a little bit about your experience.
Well, I was on the Yale Daily News, which, as the name implies, was the daily newspaper for Yale. And in those days, as you know, and some of our listeners may know, a play didn't just open on Broadway. It would go to other cities first, and they would sort of try it out and see what worked and what didn't work and make changes. And so they would go to Washington or Philadelphia, Boston, and one of the cities that they would go to would be New Haven. And so a lot of the plays that went to Broadway played first in New Haven, and the Yale Daily News reviewed those. And I don't know, maybe I was the only one who wanted to do it. So I reviewed several plays. The only one that sort of sticks in my mind to this day, I sort of feel proud of it. There was a comedy, and it was really awful. And I wrote a review saying, this is just awful. There's nothing good about it. Well, there's only one good thing about it, and that is there is a marvelous comic actor in it. He's just terrific, and his name is Alan Arkin. So to this day, I sort of feel I discovered Alan Arkin.
Oh, that's amazing. So you were a tough reviewer, but he got a good review from you.
Well, on that one, I mean, believe me, anybody with any sense at all would have been a tough reviewer on that play.
Well, what was it like? Tell me a little bit about being at Yale and over at Harvard Law School. What was just some of your experiences while you were in school?
I think I was very fortunate to go to those places, which in those days I think were very good. I don't make a big deal out of it because I don't think somebody who went to one of those schools is any better than anybody else. I mean, you can go to any college and get a good education, and I think you can go to Yale and not get a good education because it depends on what you put into it. And you can always find good teachers, and I had a lot of good teachers, but not all the teachers I had were good teachers. So I felt very pleased to be there. There were great places. I made friends and had good experiences. I think one of the reasons you go to college is to grow up, and I think I did to the extent one can expect to there. But again, my view of it is, I don't know if you're at all familiar with the national anthem of Finland, which is called Finlandia. But I love that song because what it says is, I love my country. I love the forests and the mountains and the snow and all the wonderful things here. But then it says, and other people live in other countries and they love their countries for their own good reasons. And that's my feeling about both Yale and Harvard, my experience there. I love them because I went there, but people go to other colleges and love them too, and I hope they do.
Was there a certain type of law that you thought, oh, this is the type of law I want to practice, and while you were in your journey, did that change at all?
Well, no, I don't think I did come out of that law school particularly committed to a particular field of law. What I got out of, a lot of people feel law school is very oppressive and they feel they have to work too hard. And I think a lot of law students spend too much time studying and don't necessarily do it in the right way. But I liked law school, and I particularly liked the first year because what I liked about it was law schools use the case method. You go through reading cases, which means you're reading appellate judicial decisions in cases that for one reason or other are significant or the teacher thinks is a good teaching vehicle. Frequently, I wrote a case book myself. In other words, a book collecting a number of these decisions with notes and comments and so on. And one of the reasons you choose a case is because it was poorly written, poorly reasoned. So, students can try to figure that out. But what I liked about it in particular, after college, which I also liked, was that the thing about reading a case is that in the end, somebody wins and somebody loses. Either the person is convicted or he's not convicted, or he gets damages from the other party or he doesn't. And I liked that because it made it always concrete. You could make any arguments you wanted, and you could go into theory and so on and so forth if you wanted. But in the end, you had to say, okay, well, he's convicted or he isn't. Or actually, it's an appellate case, so he was convicted, or it probably wouldn't have been an appeal, but the conviction stands or it doesn't, or the verdict in favor of the plaintiff stands or it doesn't, or for the defendant stands or it doesn't. So yeah, you have to bring it down to concreteness. And I found that very refreshing. So I thought the law school was narrowing, and I tried to make sure that I was reading some literature, even if only at time, just for a little bit each day, maybe a chapter or something, but I would be reading, Dickens or something like that. And I found law school, nevertheless, it was intellectually very invigorating, I thought, and I liked the discipline of it and the rigor of it. So I liked law school. As I say, there were drawbacks to it, but the experience. But intellectually, at least, I really did like it.
Those that have not studied law, they know about the big final to become an attorney or to become a lawyer is the bar exam. Tell me a little bit about that exam, and is it intimidating?
It's funny because, when we were law students, we didn't think about the bar exam at all. And in the books we studied, we just didn't refer to the bar exam. Some people took some courses for the bar exam. I didn't think that was going to be a problem. Now, I took the bar in New York because I was lucky enough to get a fellowship that I really wanted. The only requirement of it was that you travel outside the country and that you move around. In other words, it wasn't a fellowship to be in one place. There were other fellowships more commonly in which you would study at a university, say in England or in Europe or someplace else for a year. But this one was the opposite. It was just keep moving. You don't have to do anything in particular. Just keep moving. And you don't have to move every day, but travel.
I like that.
And the person who created that fellowship, who donated money for it, had the view that travel was broadening. And oddly enough, I would say, based on my own experience, it really was. I think that I just learned a lot and benefited a lot from traveling. I think I became less parochial in some ways, and that was a good thing. But of course, it was also a lot of fun. It was, I was traveling. One thing about traveling that way
Tell me about it.
Fortunately, I think I thought about this before I started the trip, and I think that helped because I was able to just prepare myself for it. And that was that there would be a lot of times when I was sort of lonely. Sometimes you meet people and you have great experiences and so on, but sometimes you don't. So I would be by myself a lot, and I would be seeing these great things, and I wouldn't necessarily have somebody to talk to about it. Sometimes I would, but not always. And it was good that I thought about that, because having done so, when I was traveling, I was prepared for that. And there were times when I was lonely, but I just told myself, but I knew that would be the case. That's sort of the price of this, and it was worth it. And fortunately, I'm the kind of person who's pretty happy. I like to be with people. I think in certain ways in some ways I'm shy, but in other ways I'm quite gregarious, as you're probably finding out. But I'm the kind of person who can just, as long as I have something to read, I'm going to be content. And I don't mind having meals by myself if I have something to read. And, just being by myself in an evening, for example, if I don't have anything better to do, I'll just read. And I'm perfectly happy that way. So I just always, part of what I wanted to do was to make sure I could find some books in English that I could buy, paperbacks that I could buy. It wouldn't be too heavy to carry around. And I always was able to do that. I read sort of odd stuff because I would be reading whatever I could find, and sometimes those things turned out to be pretty interesting. So,
well, I think they might be a little bit life-changing, and we're going to come up to a real quick break with our sponsors. So if you can hold just a moment, we'll come right back.
Ready to make your brand stand out? At Amplify AI Media, we combine the power of artificial intelligence with creative expertise to elevate your marketing strategy. Our AI-driven approach ensures that every decision is data-backed, every campaign is targeted, and every result is impactful. We amplify your brand's voice louder and clearer than ever before. Amplify AI Media, where innovation meets precision. Visit amplifymedia.ai. Why settle for ordinary when extraordinary is within reach?
Okay, welcome back, everyone, with Daniel Lowenstein. We're so excited to be talking with you today, Daniel. I'd like to maybe pivot a little bit. I know that the love of theater, your amazing work in law, and I think I'd like to learn a little bit more about the fact that you're considered a pioneer in election law teaching and research, and that I understand you're one of the founding editors of the Election Law Journal.
Well, it was as much of my career has been. It was basically an accident, or just it was by chance in a way. Because what I did after I got home from that trip, the job that I took, one of the things I did in law school, the Harvard Law Review had a grant rather, to send 2 students around the country doing research on something, and the subject that I was one of the 2 students who did that. It was another boondoggle for me. I like traveling in places, and I got a chance to see America, and then the next year I got a chance to see the world. So I had the best of everything. But the subject that we were traveling around on, and I won't go into it because it's a somewhat long story, but it was another accident, because the subject they had I thought sounded like it was going to be terribly boring, and I was looking for a better subject, and one of my former professors I went to talk to and recommended this. At that time, what was called the legal services movement was just getting off the ground. Legal aid for the poor was an older institution, but many people thought it was kind of a tired institution that really, did some good in, helping poor people get, say, divorces or take care of their landlord-tenant problems, or, whatever their problem was. But they felt that it was kind of tired and it didn't accomplish that much. So there was this legal services movement, which was being very much supported by the federal government as part of the war on poverty. The legal services movement was more ambitious and was trying to reform the law, as well as just providing service under the law. And, whether that was really a good idea, I think is debatable. But at the time, at least, I thought it was kind of an exciting thing. And because it was new, it was a good field. So I got a job at what was one of the most sort of glamorous of these legal services agencies, California Rural Legal Assistance, which, as its name implies, had offices in, I think, about 10 rural communities. So I was in that, and I landed in a city called Modesto, just about 90 miles due east of San Francisco.
So did you come from New York and then migrated to California with this venture?
Yeah. I came for this job.
Okay.
Actually, I worked in their central office, which at that time, when it first started, I met the person who was heading it was a young guy. And I had a summer job. The first half of that summer, before we started this trip, I was working at a large law firm in Los Angeles called O'Melveny & Myers. Another boondoggle. I just had never been west of Chicago, and here was an opportunity to, just go to Los Angeles and get familiar with that. And so I worked for, 5 or 6 weeks, or however long it was, for O'Melveny & Myers. And the person who was going to be running CRLA, who had gotten this grant, was a young guy who was moving out of O'Melveny & Myers the same day that I moved in.
Oh my goodness.
So I met him, and their offices at first were in Los Angeles. They were just a few blocks from O'Melveny. So I frankly spent about as much time in their office as I did in mine at O'Melveny, because it was just really being great to meet them, the leadership group. And they were very good lawyers, and they were young, and they were, they had great ambitions, and it was just terrific for me. I got to know them very well, and so they hired me after I finished this trip. So I spent about 2.5 years, first in San Francisco, which was by then their central office, but then most of the time in Modesto, which was, maybe not the greatest place to live in if you grew up in Manhattan. But, still, what I wanted to do was to have the experience of representing these people and doing the best I could. And we were somewhat ambitious, and I think we were able to, another one of the lawyers there and I were able to make a difference in how the juvenile court worked in Stanislaus County, which is where Modesto is. And we got into, again, sort of accidentally, we got into cases involving federal food programs. And we had some interesting cases in that field. But for me, I think by far the most important thing that happened to me in Modesto was that I met the person who became my wife. And, so we got to know each other there, and we got married while we were living in Modesto. But after I had been in Modesto at CRLA for a couple of years, even though these cases were fun, but it wasn't something I felt that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And it was also the establishment in the town and most of the legal community, they just didn't like us because, they just were not in favor of what we were doing. So it was something that, it became, sort of tiring in a certain way to be in that situation. And after a couple of two and a half years or so, I think I was sort of burnt out. But the 1970 election occurred at the end of that period. And Jerry Brown, who I didn't know, got elected Secretary of State. And one of my mentors initially when I was in San Francisco was a classmate of Brown's in law school. He went to Yale Law School, which I didn't. But so he asked this person if he wanted a lawyer. And I had lawyers in the Secretary of State's office, but he wanted somebody who would be more imaginative and be able to do things for him that would help him establish a good record. And this person didn't want to do it, but he recommended me. So I had an interview with Jerry Brown, and he hired me. So I was a civil service attorney, but I was somebody that he had really hired. And at first he said my job was going to be to sort of draw up revisions in the law school, in election law, because that was the only thing that the Secretary of State really had anything to say about. And he didn't have much to say about that either, really, when you got right down to it. But he was the sort of central person for running elections, working with the counties. The counties basically ran the elections, but there were coordinating functions, and that was done by the Secretary of State. So that's what got me into it. Now, we didn't in the end try to revise the election law in general, but we did try to do certain things, and we had some influence, I think we had some successes. But what he was primarily doing, both because he believed in it and because, he thought it was something that would give him, good attention, establish a good record for him and give him, help make him publicly known, was campaign finance reform. And so I did a lot of work on that and on related subjects such as lobbying and conflict of interest and so on. And an opportunity, I won't go into the details because it's just sort of an interesting story, but it's a long story. I saw an opportunity to become a part of a coalition with a couple of other organizations who are interested in the subject. One which is pretty well known as Common Cause, and the other is now, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was at that time, it was something called the People's Lobby, which was run by a married couple, Joyce and Ed Koopel, and what they were very good at was getting measures qualified for the ballot. They had done that. They had qualified a measure to recall Ronald Reagan, when he was governor, and then they qualified an initiative on nuclear energy, which they were opposed to. So it regulated nuclear energy fairly strictly. but they failed on both of those at the ballot box, so they weren't very good at that. But they were very good at getting it onto the ballot. And Common Cause, had a good reputation in the reform field, and campaign finance was one of the things they were quite interested in. Now, these two organizations hated each other, but I saw an opening because of some other things that had happened, and I basically could go to Common Cause and say, look, we would like you to come in with us. They weren't crazy about Jerry Brown either. A lot of liberals didn't quite trust him, and I think they were basically wrong in that, but that's a subject for another day.
Sure.
So I said, look, we can go with the People's Lobby and they can get this thing on the ballot, and we can write it well, which is something they weren't able to do with the nuclear initiative. We can write it so that it will stand up to criticism, and you can't really afford not to be a part of this if it gets on the ballot and passes in California. I mean, it would not be good for your organization. And then I went to the People's Lobby and said, it would be a lot easier with you, but we can, together with Common Cause, if we need to, qualify it for the ballot. And it's not going to be good for you if you're not a part of it. So both of them, they didn't like each other, but they didn't exactly trust Jerry Brown, especially Common Cause. But they knew that we were a solid operation, and they knew that I could do this, the legal part of it, the drafting part of it. So reluctantly, they both went into it, and drafting it, going through the drafting process, because I wrote most of the words of it, but there was another guy who worked with me in the Secretary of State who did some of it, but I did most of it, and People's Lobby wasn't too concerned with the details, but Common Cause was, and they were a little less strenuous on things, but we finally got it done, and so this thing passed. So there I was,
wow.
And I did not want to stay with this initially, because I felt that I had had enough of election law. It was, I thought I had done some good things, and I thought the initiative would be I thought this would be a good thing for the state.
Sure.
But I wanted to go on to other things, but then the more I thought about it, I was quite aware that this was passed at the primary. So it's a long, and I wrote it, and I thought I would have to pay. I thought we would pay a political price for it, and we would deserve to pay a political price for it. But I wrote it so that it went into effect the day after the new election.
No kidding.
After the governor the day after the new governor came into office, so that whoever won the election, and of course I was hoping it would be Brown,
right,
would get to appoint the members, the chairman and the members of the commission, and not Reagan. And, this was obviously a political thing, and I expected to pay a political price for it, and I think it would have been a perfectly legitimate issue for opponents of it to raise, at least with Republicans. But for some reason they didn't. And in any event, the thing passed. And by that time, there were a lot of questions about what exactly was, what it meant. I think it was well drafted, but still there are always questions. Somebody has a situation that isn't, doesn't come squarely within it. It's some odd situation. How will it apply to me? How will it apply to our organization? And there were just all these questions coming in, and I could see that it would be beneficial for this operation to have somebody who really knew it well, and who therefore could sort of, get off the ground running. And I also thought that although I really would have liked to get into a different field, nevertheless, I thought it would be a very good thing for me to be able to be in charge of something and to have the experience. I just thought I would learn from it, and benefit from the experience of being in charge, not being on somebody's staff, but being in charge of something, and especially a new operation where there'd be a lot of flexibility, but a lot of challenges. And so for that reason, I thought it wouldn't be such a bad position for me to accept. Even though, again, I would have probably preferred to move into so that what I'm saying is that it really was an accident that I got into election law, just that I happened to go to work for Jerry Brown, who happened to be doing in a job where there was nothing else to do other than elections. And then partly because I thought it would help. I thought I was in a uniquely good position to just get it started well because of the detailed knowledge that I had at the beginning. I'm not saying that somebody else couldn't have done it as well or better than I did, but I did think I had that advantage, and that it would be beneficial for obviously I'd spent a lot of time on it. I wanted it to work, and I thought I would bring that to it at least, and also that it would just be good for me personally. It would be a good experience, and it was. And I think both of those turned out to be true. So it did give me an advantage, and it did help in some ways that I knew the thing well at the beginning, and I benefited from it in many ways. I learned from it again, and so it was good all around. But it was purely accidental.
Well, I find that fascinating, and what a great contribution to the election laws in California, the great state of California, where I'm from. We're actually going to break real quick, and we'll be right back.
Fans of The Andy Griffith Show are raving about a brand new streaming series.
Chris Stone, what are you doing back here in Mayberry?
Your neighbors know they're living next door to a famous movie star yet?
He hasn't answered any of my calls.
That girl's headed right for Heartbreak Alley.
An old-fashioned love story in a modern-day Mayberry.
Yes!
A streaming series for the whole family.
Who's the only TV character named after two insects? And bee, of course.
Grandma's cat ate all the laxatives, and, well, we've got ourselves a situation.
Crazy, right?
Don't take any wooden nickels. Wooden nickels. That's a good one.
Those low-down, dirty buzzards.
It's an honor to be here. In fact, at my age, it's an honor to be anywhere.
It's a Christmas miracle.
Bravissimo.
We don't know what you're missing.
Mayberry Man, the series. Now available on Prime Video.
These people are living in another world.
Welcome back, everybody. We're visiting today with Daniel Lowenstein, who is an emeritus professor at UCL Law School and an expert in election law, and many, many other things we're learning about on our show today. Let me ask you real quick, Daniel, did you get the bug to be in politics from working with Governor Jerry Brown?
No, I mean, again, just as I never really thought about being an actor, I know I'm not cut out to be a politician. And it's not because I don't. I mean, I think one of the things, I don't think we want to get into this really in detail, or in any way, but just one of the things that differentiated me from a lot of the other scholars in election law during the years that I was doing it was that I think I believed more in the political process than they did. I mean, people, academics, and other sort of gurus, as good government, quote, good government people are sometimes called. They just, they think politics is kind of a dirty thing in some ways, and they don't have a lot of respect for the people in politics. I have always had a lot of respect for the politics, and even though I certainly saw any number of things that I didn't like during the years that I was up in Sacramento, I was able to observe the legislature to some extent, and I had a lot of friends in the government. If you live in Sacramento, that's likely to be the case. And I could tell you all kinds of terrible things that I saw, but it's the old saying, people, laws are like sausages. People who like them shouldn't watch them being made, and is the saying. And that's true. But still, I guess I'm in the Churchill camp. He's famous for having said, assuming he said it, that democracy is the worst system ever thought of, except with the exception of all the others. And that's sort of my view of it. Of course it's not perfect, and it's not pretty to watch always, but it does tend to work out pretty well, I think, and it tends to work out better than anything else that probably is likely. So and so far as politicians go, I mean, I in my experience, they were sort of like the human race. There were some who were really pretty bad and some who were very good, and the majority are probably somewhere in between. But some are really good, and if anything, I think most of them are not that good, not really outstanding, but nor are they that bad. They're just sort of ordinary people. But I don't know. I mean, compared to many other things, I think probably we're fortunate that there are, at least in those days, there were some good ones. I knew legislators that I had or was in some cases I knew them, in some cases I was just able to observe them, that I had a lot of respect for in both parties. And then I had some that I thought were just awful. And again, most of them were, they sort of did their jobs and they did them okay. They weren't especially distinguished. But a number, some of them really were. And so I never had this negative general view of politics. Now, the nature of the system has changed somewhat since then, and I think that it's not so much I think that the individuals have necessarily gotten worse or better, but it's just maybe it's harder. It's harder in some ways to do the right thing. But I expect that if I had a chance to really watch the legislature or Congress up close, I expect I would find the same thing, that some of these people are really doing the very best that they can. And so I never had that negative view. And I think the fact that I was had this experience of working for a politician and working with political people, I think that helped me. I felt as an election law scholar, because and it did differentiate me from most of the rest of them. So, but we wanted to talk about the arts, so we should probably get on.
Yeah, there we're going to go. Like, in addition to your election law scholarship, you've also published a commentary on literary works, including Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice and Dickens' Bleak House. Tell me a little bit about that. You talked about picking up books when you were in New York or when you were traveling around doing your boondoggles, that you're always looking for great novels to read, the classics. So tell me a little bit about that literally.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think literature has always been a very important part of my life. I think there's if you try to understand, I mean, I think that it's part of human nature. It's one of the better things about human nature, that there's something in us that really wants to understand things, as understand people and our situation and the nature of the universe, and if you believe in God, to understand God. They're just there are some things, beauty and there are some things in life that are just very, very important, and I think there's something in us that encourages us to try to understand them and to learn about them. And I feel that that's something that should be, that is good in people and should be developed and encouraged. I think, unfortunately, our educational system all the way through, from K through graduate school, tends not to do that very well nowadays. But I think I think that's very important. And then I sort of think that, two of the most basic ways of approaching these kinds of questions are, one is philosophy and the other is literature. And I do think that there's some people who are just, the way their minds are made, they are attracted more to philosophy and they can work better in philosophy, and others are attracted more to literature. And I think that the basic underlying reason is that, although there are exceptions, philosophy tends to start with at the most abstract level, at the top in a way, and then try to work with things by working down, deducing other principles and ideas from the most general propositions, whereas literature works in the opposite way. Literature, it deals with stories, so it deals not necessarily real people in the sense of people who actually lived, but it deals with real people in the sense of fictional people, but still people in different situations, and then their lives and their situations in life confront them with different kinds of problems, and they have to cope with them, and it's in thinking about that. So literature sort of works from the bottom up, and you read literature, and you can that can then get you thinking in more general terms about the kinds of problems that you confront in literature, that the characters confront. So I think I'm just more of a concrete kind of person.
Just a moment, we'll come right back.
Are you interested in financial technology or science topics? How about underreported issues? If so, check out the news media outlet, UCAS News and UCAS Studios. That's www.ucasstudios.com.
Are you confused about Medicare? Center for Healthcare Rights is here to help. The Health Insurance Counseling and Advocacy Program, or HICAP, offers LA County residents free, unbiased information to guide you through Medicare options, enrollment, and benefits. To schedule your free counseling session, call us at 1-800-434-0222. That's 1-800-434-0222, or visit healthcarerights.org. Center for Healthcare Rights. We help people navigate Medicare.
Okay, welcome back, everyone, with Daniel Lowenstein.
I think that's probably why I was fortunate to fall into law, and I did better in law school than I had done before, because law also, at least in the Anglo-American system, with the common law, it starts with individual cases and works up.
Right.
Whereas the European system, what's known as the civil law, tends to start with very general code provisions and then works down to the individual cases. So there are different ways of thinking. So I've read some philosophy, and I think philosophy is important, but what I've just always loved and what I feel I get the most out of is literature. So it's always been important to me. Plus, it just is fun I think there's something in us, totally aside from everything I've just been talking about, there's something in us that just likes to tell or to hear good stories.
I love that.
It's very human. And so that's what literature does. I mean, you see a play or you read a novel or a story, and it's a story, and and that's nice. And I particularly, one of the kinds of literature I think is underrated is comedy. To me, comedy is right up there with tragedy. I sometimes say, in fact, I'll be teaching a course this fall. I've taught it a few times before, called Comedy and Literature. And, what I say to my students is, this course takes comedy very seriously. And it does. I mean, I think that comedy, if you just think of tragedy, you're getting, in great, if it's great tragedy, you're being brought in great depth and great intensity into one part of human nature, one aspect of human nature, but it's not the only aspect. And comedy brings you in touch with other aspects of the human situation. So I do think it's important.
I love that. How did you become the first director of the UCLA Center for Liberal Arts and Free Institutions?
Well, I had been doing, I started working on this in, I'd say somewhere around 2003, 2005, somewhere in that, early mid 2000s. And by that time I was over 60, and I had been doing election law for many years, and I had written about most of the subjects in election law that I thought I had anything in particular to say about. I mean, there's some things I didn't write about because, I didn't think I had too much to add to what people were already saying about it. And of course, I could have stayed in the field. I mean, there are always changes, there are always new decisions and new laws and so on. So it wouldn't have been difficult to keep on going until I wanted to retire. But here again, it was kind of an accident. I don't want to go into the details of all of this, but there was a guy that I knew who had he was running an organization called the National Association of Scholars, and they have the same view that I have, more or less, of higher education, and they believe that there's a problem that the colleges are not featuring or centering the liberal arts enough, and the traditional ways of understanding literature, philosophy, history, and other subjects. And they had this one guy had sort of helped to stimulate the growth or the creation, at least at some good universities, of centers. Their interests were mainly on, say, the American founding and development of free institutions, which I think is very important. But so the guy called me out of the blue one time. I knew of what he had been doing. I knew something about that. I didn't really know him well. I basically had met him at a conference once, and we talked for 5 or 10 minutes, and that was about the extent of my acquaintance. But he just called me out of the blue, and he wanted to suggest that I try to start up a center like this at UCLA. And so the first thing I said, or the first question I asked was, well, why are you calling me? I teach in the law school. And I honestly don't remember exactly what he said in response to that, but I know what the answer was. And the answer was, because I don't know of anybody better than you to call, which I thought then, and I still think, is actually a pretty sad commentary on UCLA when you think of the size. I mean, the faculty is enormous, and there are lots of good people there.
Sure.
But that he couldn't, he who, makes it his business to know about people who have these kinds of interests, he didn't know anybody better than me to try to start something like this. I mean, it is a sad thing.
It's a compliment.
And it's very, no, I don't think, I mean, I don't think that's the interesting aspect of it. The interesting aspect of it is that there aren't, because even if you assume that I'm the most wonderful person in the world, which I'm not, and the most talented person, and the one thing I will say is I do have a really strong, and I've always had a very strong belief in this. Even if you say all of that, there ought to be somebody else at UCLA who has all of that, plus somebody who, is in the English department or is in the history department, or so, whose career
Sure.
has been in that world more than mine has been. So I figured, I thought this was a real long shot. I mean, it's hard. The universities really have not been friendly to this kind of activity. And I couldn't see any reason, it just didn't seem likely to me that I would be able to succeed in this at UCLA and getting it going. But on the other hand, I thought, well, I don't really have anything to lose. As I said before, I'm in my 60s by now. I've really done most of the things that I think are important. There's really only one article that I wish I had a chance to finish. I was just starting to work on it in election law when this came along, and I didn't get it done before I retired from election law. But basically, on everything else, I had said what I wanted to say, and I made my important point, what I felt was, what I had to contribute to the field. So I have nothing, and I'm not ambitious for anything in particular at this stage in my career. So why not just this is something that I really care about a lot. And why not just
it's about the great works
of
Western civilization is what I had read. I think that's wonderful.
So why not just see if, take the long shot. What do I have to lose, really? So I started out, I rounded up some other faculty members, some of whom I knew, some of whom were new to me, who, for different kinds of reasons, were willing to, sort of put their name to this and say, they would support it. And I found the administration more receptive than I expected. I think there were a couple of reasons, at least. One was I was fortunate. The person who was then had recently become executive vice chancellor, which is really after the chancellor, it's the highest administrative job at UCLA, happened to be a historian who was very sympathetic to this kind of thing. I mean, he actually, although I didn't think of him at the time, he actually probably would have been a better person to run CLAFI than I am, because he has the same, he also believes in it very strongly. But on the other hand, by that time he was executive vice chancellor. He certainly wasn't going to be able to do anything like that. So, but he was very helpful in the thing. But the other thing was, there's a funny thing about UCLA. It's probably, if I had to name, name one thing that I really like about UCLA, this would probably be the first thing I would name, would be there's a kind of a laissez-faire ethic at UCLA, which is sort of, I may think what you're doing is crazy, but you probably think what I'm doing is crazy. And as long as you don't bother me and try to interfere with what I'm doing, I'm not going to try to interfere with what you're doing. So there is a really good sense of pluralism, I think, here. I don't know what and I have a feeling that that's more something, more salient or more stronger at UCLA than it may be at other universities. I don't know what the reason for that is, but I think that worked in my favor too. I know that, it took a long time to get this going. And to my surprise, that wasn't because of opposition to it. It was just because, for normal bureaucratic reasons, and universities big universities at least are terrible bureaucracies, and UCLA is no exception to that. So it took a long time, and but when they and one of the things that delayed it was nobody knew where to put it administratively.
Right.
So I went to three of the administrators who I thought were sort of the key people here, one of whom was the executive vice chancellor, who I knew was supportive, and the other two had at least said, that they thought this would be a good thing to have at UCLA. So I said, look, all three of you agree that this is a good thing. You can't seem to agree on where to put it. Why don't the three of you just get in a room and just figure out, where you'd like to have it go? So they decided to put it into the humanities division, which was fine. And so I didn't even know the dean of humanities. There was a new dean of humanities, and I met with him, and he said he was new in the job, and he didn't know me, and said, well, I think before I sign off on this, and I thought this was quite right, I think I ought to talk to some of the faculty people in the humanities division and see what they think about it. And we were just late in the term anyway, so summer was on its way. So I said, okay, fine. Why don't you do that, and we'll get together in the fall and see where we stand. And the only when I met with him in the fall, the only objection or concern that he had was he thought that people had told him, well, I won't even go into that because we don't really, because I was able to satisfy that. But the point that I wanted to make is that one of the good things that he heard was that a lot of people thought, well, it's not something I'm at all interested in, but there are people who do believe in this kind of thing, and I can't see any reason why they shouldn't have a center, if they want to have one.
Exactly.
So I thought spoke very well for UCLA, and it confirmed what had been my sense anyway, that there is this sense of laissez-faire, that, we have people in the faculty, let them do what they want to do. And in the end, good things will come out of that.
I love that.
So that was good.
Daniel, that is such a great story. I appreciate it. And we're running out of time, and I'm just going to have to invite you back to the Captain's Table to learn more about your love of Shakespeare and the Interact Theater Company also. Would you love to come back sometime?
Sure, I'll be glad to.
That would be great. Thank you so much for your time. You can find the Captain's Table on our Facebook page and on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us. You all have a wonderful day.